Hello, it's John Heaton, and today I'm going to do a video covering a particular year from the 70s, 1972, and look at it kind of in the context of what was going on musically at the time and politically at the time, and a few events from the sporting world, and what albums were coming out from the ex-Beatles as well. And just because I think it's an interesting subject and an interesting topic to do, and it was inspired by Matt Williamson's recent video on Pop Goes the 60s, where he was discussing whether the solo Beatles remained cutting edge as the 70s progressed, and he made the argument that in 72 it's when the solo Beatles stopped being cutting edge. Now what's your definition of cutting edge? It's a tricky one, but maybe something like at the forefront of what was happening musically might be a good enough definition. And of course one gets into whether that includes commercial stuff or whether it has to be cutting edge as in a slightly new sound and all that. Anyway, or whether it's relevant. I mean, I suppose one can debate the meaning of the word, but anyway. So 72, let me just talk about some albums released from that year, and you'll see that the competition was pretty stiff. There are a lot of good albums released in this year. This one from Neil Young, Harvest, which was his mainstream breakthrough, and which he famously disowned afterwards and refused to copy the template, which would have given him another massive hit. But anyway, that was a great album, some great songs on it. And this was the Rolling Stones' double album follow-up to Sticky Fingers, Exile on Main Street, and remains in my top two Stones albums probably. This was Paul Simon's superb debut, self-titled debut from 72, and this was a joy. It must have been a joy when it first came out. I was too young, but I've discovered it obviously since, and I just think it's an absolute tour de force of an album, and very, very dark and personal lyrics as well. I love them. Ziggy Stardust from David Bowie. He'd already done Hunky Dory by this stage, but Ziggy was kind of building on that, and a fantastic album from the first track, 5 Years, to the last track, Rock and Roll Suicide, with everything in between, like Moon Age Daydream and Hang On To Yourself. This was an album from Fleetwood Mac, which didn't do very well commercially, but I just picked it up a couple of years ago. Bare Trees, and Danny Cohen has got some really nice tracks on that album. Stevie Wonder, this was his follow-up to Music of My Mind. I think they both came out in 72, or maybe Music of My Mind was 71, but this album was 72, and it opens with You Are the Sunshine of My Life, not Superstition. I got that wrong in a recent video, but Superstition opens side 2, and also the song, I Believe, Want to Fall in Love with You, It Will Be Forever, is on that album. This is Traffic's live double, On the Road, which actually maybe that came out in 73, maybe I got that wrong, sorry. But anyway, they were doing good stuff around this time, Traffic. This is Obscured by Clouds by Pink Floyd, and this album wasn't a huge seller at the time, but looking back on it, it sowed the seeds for what was to come on Dark Side of the Moon, of similar sounding songs, and a really, really good album from Pink Floyd there. And Honky Chateau from Elton John, to me this is his first absolute stone cold classic. 5-star album, and he was do little wrong for the next few years. So that shows you some of the competition. Now let's get it in context before we talk about Paul, because I think Paul's story in 72 is the most interesting. Well, I suppose John's is as well, and we can cover that in a separate video, but I'm quickly going to tell you what the other Beatles were up to in 72. Well, Ringo only had one single, although it did get to number 2, Back Off Boogaloo, produced by George Harrison. This was what we got from John, which was a sort of joint album with Yoko. So there's a live album as well with it, but basically it's a studio album of half John and half Yoko. So not very satisfying on the whole. There's some good things about it, but if you compare that album to some of the ones I was just showing you, it's not really in the same league, if we're honest. So that was John. Nothing from George other than the Concert for Bangladesh live album had come out. Sorry about the picture of George I pasted on here as a teenager. So that did come out, and that was very satisfying, but no studio material from George. And only 4 singles from McCartney. So and Wings. So before we get on to that, let's tell you the background. So in '71, after Ram, Paul decided he wanted to go on the road. So he could have gone on the road with session musicians, as people like Paul Simon have done over the years, but he decided the best way to get a live sound and go on the road was to get a band together, a permanent band together, or as he hoped. There'd be some changes over the years, but Denny Laine he hired, who stayed with him throughout, and he also hired Denny Sywell from the Ram sessions, and they came up with this album. And Linda was also in the band, of course, and they came up with this album, Wings, Wildlife. And if you notice, his name's not even on the cover, and Wings' name is not even the cover. Not that people would have heard of Wings; it was a brand new group. So if you walked into a record shop, you might not know who this album was by. Although Paul is recognisable in the picture, it's a fairly small picture of him there. So countries like Greece had said, we're not having none of that, so they put Paul and Linda's name firmly on the cover and told record buyers who they were buying. But even efforts like that didn't do much for the album's success. It did reach number 11, I think, in the UK, and number 8 in the US, so not bad, but not great by Paul's standards. So Paul then hired another guitarist to sort of complete the lineup to go on the road, Henry McCulloch, guitarist who'd formerly been in Joe Cocker's Grease Band, and he was from Northern Ireland. So hired him in January 72, and then on the 30th of January 72, there was a very unfortunate event in Northern Ireland, which is referred to as Bloody Sunday, where there was a relatively peaceful demonstration against the British government in Londonderry, and the British troops opened fire on the crowd and killed 13 demonstrators. And John and Paul, both with Irish background, coming from Liverpool, were so incensed by this event, they both wrote songs about it. And Paul's song, the first single to be released by Wings, was Give Ireland Back to the Irish, which is quite a straightforward plea to do exactly that. Say, he talks about it from the British point of view, so he starts off by saying, Great Britain, you are tremendous and nobody knows like me, but really, what are you doing in the land across the sea? And it's relatively well-intentioned lyrics, although some people thought it was naive as a solution to the crisis just to withdraw completely. But unfortunately, the song isn't much, and it's a little bit unfortunate that it's kind of got this catchy chorus, which sounds more like a sort of drunken sing-along towards the end of the song. So it's not his best single. It did okay. I think it got to, I did have my notes here somewhere. Yeah, 16 in the UK and 21 in the US, although it was banned in the UK because the BBC thought it was too political. And that's just the way things were in those days, although years later, U2 were able to release a song which was not banned, called Bloody Sunday. I think it was called Bloody Sunday as well, actually, as well as John Lennon's song from '72, which was not a single, so I guess it wasn't banned, but I guess nobody played it on the radio either. So that was Give Ireland Back to the Irish. And then Wings basically said, okay, we're going to start off really small. So they got in the little van and went up the motorway in England, heading north, and visited all these universities and just turned up on the door and said, do you want Paul McCartney to play tomorrow lunchtime? And of course the head of the student union said, yeah, pull the other one. And then they said, well, come and see in the van. So they showed it was Paul and said, okay, fine, we'll have you. So the band checked into the local B&B, cheapest B&B they could find, and turned up the next lunchtime, played for the students, 50p on the door, pretty cheap. Didn't have many songs to play. I mean, I suppose they could have played songs from Ram and McCartney, but I don't think they did draw much from those two albums. They played a few songs from Wildlife, and they played the new single, Give Ireland Back to the Irish, but they ended up having to do songs like Long Tall Sally and Lucille twice and pretending someone had requested them because they'd run out of material, and probably because they hadn't rehearsed an awful lot before going on the tour. But anyway, the students lapped it up. It was a great success. And then So Paul, what I admire about Paul is in '72 he went back to basics and started from scratch really, with a brand new band, with starting off on really small gigs, universities, and then in Europe playing to 2,000-3,000 seaters max. Went around many countries of Europe. I've sort of got them written down. He got in an open deck, double-decker bus, open on the top, that is, and went around France, Germany, Switzerland, Denmark, Finland, Sweden, Norway, Holland, Belgium. For some reason, he didn't make it as far south to go to Spain and Italy, but much to the disappointment of the Spanish and Italian fans, no doubt. But he did 25 dates, and as I say, he played to small stadiums. I saw he did a concert in Arles, which is famously where Vincent van Gogh lived in the south of France. And also he did a concert in The Hague at the Concert Gabot Stadium. And if you were wondering what that line in Rock Show, the Wings song, we're going to the rock show, the Concert Gabot, you've got long hair at the Madison Square, rock and roll at the Hollywood Bowl. Well, the Concert Gabot referred to in that song is the venue in The Hague, and I think there's a similar one in Amsterdam, but I was researching this and it was The Hague they played at in '72. So the next thing, but before that tour even got started, Paul released another single called Mary Had a Little Lamb. And some critics, well, obviously the critics were appalled and said, what the hell are you doing, Paul, writing a nursery rhyme? Some people thought it was in response to the Ireland song getting banned. Some people just thought it was just done as a children's song for his daughter Mary, which I think is nearer to the truth. I think the reasons are mixed, but Paul probably didn't make a very sensitive move in terms of endearing himself to the critics, because his image was already quite damaged. He was already getting blamed for the Beatles breakup, for one. Ram and McCartney had not been well received. Wildlife had been even more poorly received, and Ireland not particularly well received either. And here we are. George Harrison went on record complaining that now Paul's resorted to writing a nursery rhyme. Well, okay, that's true, but it was only one song in his career, and I can forgive him for that. And I think, and it did effortlessly make the top 10, or it made number 10, I think, in the US, and it made number 28 in the US and number 6 in the UK. But rather foolishly, Paul was like boasting that, it sold more copies than Tumbling Dice. Well, that may be true, but it's not as good a single as Tumbling Dice, not in the same league. But anyway, I forgive Paul for that. As I say, he had a young family at the time. They were his audience when he was at home playing on the piano. Mary liked having her name sung. And in his whole career, he's only done a couple of songs for kids, this one and the Frog Chorus, We All Stand Together, so I'll forgive him for that, but others don't. Then towards the end of the year, he came up with what turned out to be a double A-side. I'm not sure if it was originally intended as a double A-side, Hi, 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 and Sea Moon. On my single here, it doesn't tell you side A or side B, but I guess we'll call it a double A-side. But anyway, it turned out to be that way because the BBC banned Hi, Hi, Hi because it had sexual and drug references. And they promoted Sea Moon on the B-side, which is a gorgeous piano-led number with nonsensical lyrics, but a really nice reggae feel. And I much prefer Sea Moon to Hi, Hi, Hi. I think the lyrics of Hi, Hi, Hi are dated badly. They weren't particularly clever at the time or since. And it's one of those songs I just don't wish to hear again, because he has played it an awful lot over the years in concert. Anyway, did well. It got to number 5 in the UK and number 10 in the US. So this was my bootleg of the Wings Over Switzerland tour live in Montreux, 72. And you'll notice the set list is quite interesting here. Bip Bop, Smile Away, Mumbo, Give Ireland Back to the Irish, 1882. I Would Only Smile, Denny's song, Blue Moon of Kentucky, The Mess, Best Friend, which arguably was written about John Lennon's Soily, which would later turn up on Wings Over America. I Am Your Singer from Wildlife, Say You Don't Mind, another Denny song, Henry's Blues from McCulloch, Seaside Woman, which was later released as a single, but not in 72, although it was recorded by the band properly in 72. So that was, and then Wildlife, the title track from the album, My Love was available throughout 72, it seems, as a potential Wings single, and could have really launched their career in magnificent style. But he hung on to it, and it came out later in 73, and it was a #1 hit single then, of course, and it featured on Retro Speedway. So people, I think Terry Wilson, for example, in his book says releasing Mary was the biggest mistake in McCartney's career, with My Love up his sleeve. Well, yeah, I get that opinion, but anyway, that's what happened. So what else have we got to say? There was also Paul went to the trouble of making tapes of a lot of the 72 tour and making them into a kind of what was supposed to be a kind of TV special called Bruce McMouse, which featured these animated mice who went on tour with Wings and lived beneath the stage. And it's a bit silly, but it's quite nice to watch. And it's, if only for the live footage of Wings performing Eat at Home, which is marvellous to see, Blue Moon of Kentucky, Wildlife, I Am Your Singer is on there. This stuff was unavailable on YouTube for years and years, but currently, as of today, it's available, maybe taken down tomorrow. Maybe I'm Amazed is performed as well. Seaside Woman, it's great to see them do that. Bip Bop, a clip of that, My Love, Hi Hi Hi, and Mary. And also, just want to point out that for Mary Had a Little Lamb, love it or hate it, the band made no fewer than 4 promo videos for it, which are all available on YouTube and quite hilarious to watch. And they also did a version on tape of Top of the Pops, so that was wiped by the BBC. So just to conclude, if I had to sum up this period for Paul, I would say in terms of commercial success, it would be like a 6. In terms of song quality, I would say around the same, maybe 6 or 7. Lyrics, I think, are pretty weak during this period of Paul's career, and his image was almost at an all-time low. But in terms of bravery, you know, putting some of this tracks out, like to say what he thought about the Ireland situation, or do a song for his daughter, or do a Back to Basics album with Wings, with no frills, I thought was quite a brave thing to do, and I applaud him for that. So anyway, what else? Well, I just had a couple of other things to tell you which happened in 1972. Leeds beat Arsenal 1-0 in the English FA Cup final. Remember that? Alan Clark header. Bobby Fischer beat Boris Spassky in the World Chess Championship in Reykjavik, Iceland, and Bobby Fischer was representing USA and Spassky was representing the Soviet Union, so it was no less than a Cold War on the chessboard. And I remember that vividly from it happening at the time, following it game by game. And also remember Stan Smith triumphing over Ilie Nastase in the Wimbledon tennis final, 7-5 in the 5th, I remember. So I was following some stuff in 72, but not music. That would come later for me. But I think it's an interesting year, strong competition, but pretty slim pickings from a Beatles fan's point of view. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.